Well, why don't we get started? Sure. We'll talk about time in one of our webinar programs going forward because time's so important, and we certainly respect your time. So we are going to try to get these started right on time as we go forward. And with that, welcome to the Kenny and Sam's webinar series that we've put together especially to work with you folks in the construction industry. Drew and I came up with this program to hit on the hot topics and otherwise high risk issues that you're regularly dealing with. And for purposes of calendaring, we're going to be holding these every third Thursday of the month, beginning at 7:30. We're going to try to keep them from 7:30 to 8 so that we hit you really nail substantively whatever issue we're speaking on that day, and then allow you to get on about your day without having to spend too much time with the lawyers. Just by way of brief background, I think many of you on here may have already dealt with our firm or know us otherwise, but Kenny and Sam's is a civil litigation and risk management firm. We handle all types of civil litigation ranging from business to business disputes to shareholder disputes, insurance coverage work, a lot of employment law, a lot of real estate litigation, and then main focus of my practice and my partner Drew's is construction law, and that's both construction risk management work, drafting and negotiating contracts, and helping with issues that come up on projects, to litigating issues when that type of thing is required. Again, we really appreciate you joining us and look forward to seeing you at future programs going forward. With that, let me flip it over to my partner, Drew Colby, here to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Can you move just a switch? Thank you, Mike. My name is Drew Colby. I've been practicing construction law for 35 years. My practice is probably 50-50 transactional, which means I'm negotiating construction contracts, and the other 50% is litigation, which typically deals with payment and performance issues. I'm AV rated by the Martindale and Hubbell, which is the highest rating that they bestow upon their lawyers. So Mike and I have been talking a little bit about client feedback, what we're hearing, what are the interests of the industry, and one of the issues that's come up repeatedly over the last several months is price escalation. We're getting these calls on a daily basis, if not more than a daily basis. How do we manage this risk with price escalation? So we've been negotiating and drafting contracts that deal specifically with this issue to place the risk in a place where both parties can agree to it and make the deal go forward. And what we're going to do today is explain some of those contract terms, some of those negotiations, so that you have these tools so when you come across this issue, which you will in virtually every contract now, you'll know how to manage the risk and place it appropriately.
So as we go forward, you'll notice there's a chat function. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in. We'll try to keep track of questions coming in and field them as we go forward. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So let's jump right in to price escalation, and we'll also talk at the end about supply chain interruption and how that can affect your contract as well. I think that the initial thing that's really important for you to think about with price escalation is that there is no magic reset button out there in the law that says just because prices escalated more than you anticipated, that all of a sudden your contract that you signed and negotiated all of a sudden gets to change. There's some arguments to be made along the lines of what's referred to as commercial impracticability when there's price escalation, but it's not a great argument. It's not a strong argument. And so most of the time what the courts are going to say, if faced with a fight about whether you're entitled to a change related to unforeseen costs in your contract, what the courts are going to say is, well, what does the contract say? What does the relationship between the parties provide for? And the relationship between the parties is provided for in the contract. So we're always going to be looking at what the contract says. I started out by saying that there's no magic button for you. And I say that because Drew and I deal with contracts all the time. And I want you to be cognizant of that. And so I want to walk through just what a couple of the standard form contracts say so that you have some appreciation for the fact that, generally speaking, there's no magic reset button for you unless you negotiate price escalation language in at the outset of the contract. And specifically, I'm gonna do this with reference to the AIA A201 lump sum contract and the consensus docs 200 document, another lump sum. But in terms of whether you're dealing with lump sum or some other contract, unless you're talking about a cost plus, you're going to see terms like I'm going to refer to here. When you look at the AIA A201, it provides for changes in certain circumstances. That is, additional costs you may be able to recoup in certain circumstances. Specifically, though, those instances are limited. One of those you can find in section 3.2.4 of the A201. And what it really provides for is change orders where the architect clarifies or changes the design documents. Specifically, it says that if the contractor believes additional cost or time is involved because of clarifications or instructions the architect issues in response to contractor notices for RFIs, the contractor shall submit claims as provided for in Article 15. So if the architect changes something or clarifies something and you think that that impacts what you bid, you're entitled to make a change order request there. But that's not a price escalation situation. Similarly, 3.7.4 provides for a change order condition that, again, isn't price escalation or material cost escalation. It's when you encounter concealed or unknown conditions. Specifically, what the 201 states is if the contractor encounters conditions at the site that are subsurface or otherwise concealed, or physical conditions that differ materially from those indicated in the contract documents, or unknown physical conditions of an unusual nature that differ materially from those ordinarily found to exist. Those conditions, again, unforeseen conditions, are going to entitle you to make a change order claim, but they don't. Neither of those situations provide for material cost escalation as a ground for a change order. On top of that, if you go to section 3.4.1 of the 201, it provides that the contractor shall provide and pay for labor, materials, equipment, tools, construction equipment, and machinery. And then it goes on, other facilities and services necessary for proper execution and completion of the work, whether temporary or permanent, and whether or not incorporated or to be incorporated in the work. Nothing in there about your right to price or cost escalation changes, and it's specifically providing that you, the contractor, own the cost responsibility that you've agreed to as part of the contract price. Now, consensus docs obviously is a more favorable document for contractors, but even it doesn't provide you the right for a change order related to cost escalation. Specifically, if you've got the consensus docs document or you use it, you're going to be looking at contract price, section 2.4.5, and the only thing it's going to allow a cost increase for is related to allowances. So it specifically indicates what the contract price is, and it indicates that, except as provided for by allowances, and then there's a section to indicate what the allowances are. So if you've grouped things, and Drew will talk about this, into allowances, you may have an avenue to pursue additional costs. In fact, you should. But if you haven't identified it as an allowance, you're going to own it. Unfortunately, the change 4.3 change order section A201 dealing with unforeseen conditions and architectural changes. The cost of the work section 2.4.8 of the A200. Again, if you're going to get a change, it ties back to changes in the work, which doesn't in the contract include material cost escalation. The only avenue under these base documents without editing, without negotiation, that may allow for some right to cover or recover for material cost escalation is in instances where you've been delayed on the project and you're entitled to an extension of time under the contract. If as a result of that delay and during that delay, material costs go up, there would be an argument to make a change order claim related to that based on the base contract documents. But again, that's only going to be if you are delayed and are entitled to an extension of time. That's also only going to be if there is not a no damages for delay clause in your contract. So again, the point of my discussion right now is just to really focus you on your form contracts out there don't have a magic button for you. And therefore, it's incredibly important, especially now where cost escalation is very foreseeable. We all know you can't hold prices for more than a week or 2 weeks. Where it's very foreseeable, it is imperative that you're negotiating the right to receive a change order related to material cost escalation into your contract. And with that, let me flip it back to Drew to talk about how we've been doing that on a regular basis with clients. And he's going to walk you through some of the different instances and different examples that we've used.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So let me give you probably a real life scenario of what happens when you don't have a price escalation clause, right? When you don't have one of these clauses I'm talking about, what happens is it makes us look back and look at these secondary clauses that Mike's talking about. So now if we're representing a contract, we're trying to get a price increase, we go into the court and we say, we should get a price increase under all these different provisions. The other side will most likely say, wait a minute, these provisions haven't been interpreted to allow those price increases. The AIA contracts have been around for over 100 years. Your Honor, they want you to change 100 years of law to benefit them specifically on this issue that they knew was happening at this current time, right? That's the argument we're going to get. The argument we'd have to rebut that with would be something along the lines of, even the AIA contracts change every 10 years to reflect current conditions. If they didn't change, right, women still wouldn't be able to vote. What we're doing is we're seeing an evolution of these AIA contracts to accommodate current conditions. That's a secondary argument, the outcome of which is certainly unclear. What we're trying to do is prevent you from putting us into that position where we have to argue something that does not have a certainty of outcome.
Let me say something on that point, Drew. When you think about risk management, try to avoid thinking about it as just a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo, because the way we think about it is every time you put yourself in a risk situation, you increase the chances you're going to have to deal with your lawyers. And as much as we welcome working with you, indeed, if you weren't there, we wouldn't be here. We also recognize that the more times you have to deal with us, there's a cost component that goes with that. There's a cost component that goes with it that you haven't built into your contract price. So every time you're dealing with us on a risk issue, it's eating at your bottom line profit. The other thing is, most of the time when you have to deal with your lawyers on a risk issue, there really is some risk out there. And the other side may not be willing to concede that you're correct. And when that happens, you've increased the chances that you're going to be in some sort of litigation. When you're in litigation, you're paying even more in legal fees, and you're creating some risk that you lose on that issue altogether. So whenever there is a legitimate argument to be made on the other side, therefore you may lose your argument, you're going to be more likely to negotiate from your position. And that means when you negotiate from your position, again, you're giving up dollars that you're otherwise entitled to, and that's going to eat into your profit. So what we really want to do, and what Drew's going to talk about, is how to negotiate these things into your contract at the beginning so that there is a lack of ambiguity. That is, it is clear when it is you're entitled to a change order related to these issues, and you won't be at risk.
So here are the four, there are general categories, but here's generally the four ways that we have managed and are managing these price escalation clauses. I'll give you the names first, then I'll describe what they are. The first one's the total cost. The second is the line item cost. The third is the discrete items cost. And the fourth is the allowance cost. Now, let me go through each one of these because they all have pluses and minuses. And what we're doing is, you know, sometimes you're mishing and mashing four of them, sometimes two of them, sometimes you're sticking with one. But we'll give you a general idea of how these different clauses work and how they get negotiated. The total cost, it's easy. We look at the original line item for material costs, compare it to actual post-construction material costs. And then we put in a clause that says if the line item material cost is exceeded by X%, 3%, 5%, whatever it is, then the contractor is entitled to a change order for the delta. So for example, if you had $100,000 of material costs, they agreed that anything over 3% of that is owner owned, and the costs come in at 105% at the end of the project, the contractor would get a 2% change order for the amount of the material cost. That's an easy math. That's one way that we do it. Another way that we do it is the line item approach, which is you take all your material costs and you line item them. Every one of your material costs. We've got steel, we've got concrete, we've got lumber, we've got et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Asphalt, whatever it happens to be. And then we say, if any one of these items go over X%, then the contractor is entitled to a change order for the delta. Now, we rail when we represent contractors against line item guarantees. In this instance, this is an owner line item guarantee that if the price exceeds a line item for materials over a certain percent, then the contract.
For you all to understand is our experience with this has been owners have been willing to negotiate on these type of things. They may not be willing to write you a blank check on material cost escalation. That's frightening to them, and that's understandable. They want to have some sort of certainty as to what the price is going to be on the job. They don't want to enter into a contract only to find out the whole contract has gone up by X% at the end of the day, and they've got no recourse. They want to have some comfort level, and that's understandable. You know, they've got funding. They're getting loans. The bank may insist or may push back on some of the material cost escalation language because the bank wants to know that the owner is not jeopardizing its financial situation. Yeah. But we have found that owners are willing to negotiate on this, and that's why it's important to understand one, not to just think, oh, they're never going to do it, because they will do it. And frankly, if they're not open to having this discussion right now, you have to consider whether this is really a project you want to do, because you're going to be at a significant risk.
We build the risk into your fee or however else you're going to build it in, but you know, somewhere or another, you have to manage that risk.
So I'll be quiet now and flip it back to Drew, because he's going to talk to you about some other ways that we've been able to negotiate where owners have come back and said, I'm not comfortable with this sort of blank check approach. Give me some certainty. Drew's going to talk about that.
Yeah. So we talked briefly about the total cost approach. We talked briefly about the line item approach. The next one, which is one I find that is probably used the most, is discrete item cost analysis. And that is, we create a paragraph in a contract that says if any of these items, these material costs go over, then just these material costs do they get a change order for. So in other words, instead of line iteming across all your material costs, you just pick the ones that a certain number of them, like lumber's the big one right now. But there might be 5, there might be 3, there might be 12 of these. Steel, you just put a number on them. And these are usually best served for items, materials that have to be purchased subsequently. So you really are at risk for these costs later on. So this is the discrete item. You just take a series of discrete items and say, if these go over by X percentage. And again, you can make those percentages unique to each item. Steel might be 1%, lumber might be 5%, asphalt might be 9%, but that's kind of the approach. So it's not a line item of all of them, it's a line item of only some. And that gets a lot of receptivity, I guess is the word, from the owners. It seems like the owners look at this clause more favorably than some of the others, certainly more than the line item guarantee. The last one is the allowance. You could break your material costs down in whole or in part in allowances, right? So I'll give you lumber up to 100,000, but anything over that is a change order. I'll give you asphalt up to 50,000. It could be a XYZ. That's the allowance approach. And the AI contracts in particular have a line in them for allowances. So instead of creating